There are empires built on foundations of marble and steel, designed to defy the centuries, and there are others, darker and more volatile, built on fear, silence, and criminal complicity. But history, that relentless judge that has seen the Romanovs fall in a Siberian basement and the Medici lose their banking soul, teaches us a brutal and absolute truth. It does not matter how many generals you buy. It does not matter how many tons of cocaine you export to finance loyalty. And it does not matter how high the walls you build around your palace are when a tyrant's time ends. Collapse is not a slow erosion. It is a catastrophic, irreversible seismic event that occurs in the blink of an eye. For Nicolás Maduro Moros, the man who inherited the nation with the largest oil reserves on the planet and turned it into a scene of medieval misery, the clock finally stopped at 03:45 in the morning of the 3rd of January, 2026. This is the minute-by-minute chronicle of how the man who believed himself the reincarnation of Bolivar ended up handcuffed in pajamas, trembling not from the cold of the air conditioning, but from the overwhelming weight of a reality he had evaded for 14 bloody years. That night, Caracas did not sleep. It simply waited. The city, submerged in one of its usual total blackouts that turned the capital into a wolf's mouth, lay under a heavy, almost electric silence. But while ordinary citizens sweated in their beds without fans, in the military heart of the city, inside the fortress of Fuerte Tiuna, the most advanced technology in the world was about to unleash hell. Operation Thunder was not a clumsy invasion. It was a choreography of death and precision executed by the JSOC, the United States Joint Special Operations Command. While the regime's Russian S-300 air defense radars, technological scrap that cost the Venezuelan people billions, were blinded by a massive cyber attack that left operator screens black. 6 MH-60 stealth helicopters, modified to be invisible to sound and radar, crossed the coastal mountain range like black specters. They did not come to negotiate. They did not bring diplomats. They brought Delta Force operators, men whose only mission was high-value extraction. Imagine the scene inside the presidential residence. In those last seconds of peace, Nicolás Maduro slept in his armored bedroom, surrounded by absurd luxuries. Egyptian silk sheets with 1,000 threads, a hospital-grade air purification system, and the artificial silence of an industrial generator. He fell asleep believing himself untouchable, protected by rings of Cuban security and loyal generals. But he awoke to the sound every dictator fears more than death itself: the roar of flashbang grenades detonating in his own hallway. The breach was pure and controlled violence. The reinforced mahogany doors with steel splintered, the elite bodyguards, men who swore on television to give their lives for the revolution, surrendered in less than 90 seconds or were neutralized with surgical double-tap shots. There was no heroic resistance, no armed people defending their leader. There was only the chaos of tactical boots on imported marble floors and shouts in English and Spanish. And there, amid the white smoke of grenades and the red lasers of rifle sights, appeared the figure of the worker president. The image was pathetic and devastating. He wore no commander-in-chief uniform, no tricolor jacket. Nicolás Maduro, the man who threatened the empire weekly on national television, was found disoriented, wearing silk pajamas, trying to reach a satellite phone that no longer had signal. In his eyes, those eyes that once looked at cameras with mocking arrogance, there was no power, only primal terror. The fear of a cornered animal that knows the slaughterhouse doors have opened. The moment of capture was the antithesis of all his propaganda. He was reduced to the floor. His hands, hands that signed torture orders and hunger decrees, were tied behind his back with industrial plastic zip ties. He was lifted like dead weight, a trembling meat sack of 120 kilograms. His wife, Celia Flores, the first combatant, the architect in the shadows of the largest nepotism in history, watched the scene in sepulchral silence, pale as a corpse, knowing that the fate of her nephews in American prisons now mirrored her own future. As he was dragged toward the helicopter waiting in the gardens watered with potable water while the city drank from the Guaire River, Maduro may have taken one last look at his kingdom. He saw the emergency lights of tactical vehicles reflected in the windows of his mansion. He saw the collapse of his lie. He was not leaving as a political martyr. He was leaving as what he truly was. According to the federal indictment of the Southern District of New York, the capo of a narco-terrorist organization, a common criminal with a $15 million bounty on his head. The news of his extraction exploded at dawn like an informational nuclear bomb. The phones of 30 million Venezuelans vibrated in unison. Maduro has fallen. 3 words, only 3 words, that unleashed decades of contained euphoria. But before going out to celebrate, before toppling statues, we must understand the magnitude of what he left behind. We must enter that house, now empty. Because to understand evil, it is not enough to see the monster in a cage. You must see the lair where it fattened itself, while its people became skeletons. What the agents found inside Fuerte Tiuna was not a presidential house. It was the largest crime scene in Latin America, an architectural autopsy of corruption. The exterior walls are not brick. They are military-grade reinforced concrete, 1 meter thick, capable of withstanding the direct impact of an anti-tank rocket or the blast wave of a car bomb. The bizarre windows are not windows. They are 5-layered armored glass, polarized to the maximum, preventing sunlight from touching the interior. More importantly, they prevent any sniper from seeing silhouettes inside. The air inside the residence is artificially processed by an industrial filtration system similar to those used in nuclear bunkers or war submarines. Every molecule of oxygen is purified before it enters his lungs. The reason, his deepest fear, the one that kept him awake at night, was not a marine invasion. It was the invisible. Poisons, nerve agents, toxic gases, modified viruses. He lived terrified that the CIA, Mossad, or worse, one of his own traitorous comrades, could assassinate him without firing a bullet. Inside the bedroom area, the architecture of madness became evident. There was no fixed main room. Soldiers found a corridor with 3 identical armored suites, acoustically isolated. Each night, in a ritual of domestic Russian roulette, Maduro chose randomly which of the 3 he would sleep in. No one, not even the most trusted cleaning staff, knew where the dictator rested until he opened the door himself in the morning. He was a man moving in circles inside his own burrow, incapable of closing his eyes in peace, haunted by the shadows of his own crimes. And then there was the food. In a country where Maduro's diet caused the population to lose an average of 11 kilograms of body weight due to protein scarcity, where children searched for leftovers in garbage trucks. Inside this bunker operated a gastronomic protocol worthy of a paranoid Roman emperor. The kitchen was a sterile laboratory, supervised not by chefs, but by Cuban intelligence agents of the G2. Before any food reached the president's lips, it had to pass taste tests by real human tasters, whose only job description was risking their lives trying the leader's coffee, soup, or steak. Imagine the daily scene. Nicolás Maduro sitting at his mahogany dining table, silently watching a servant eat his meal, waiting 15 or 20 minutes to see if they would die foaming at the mouth before daring to take the first bite himself. That is not life. That is a miserable existence, enslaved to absolute terror. But the most shocking part of this bunker was not how he lived, but what he kept for the final moment. A moment that arrived too quickly in the basement of the residence. Behind a Fischer-Bach bank-grade vault door, which the operators had to blow open with thermal charges, they found the escape fund. It was not Swiss bank accounts. Those are traceable. It was the physical liquidity of the loot. What the soldiers' cameras captured when the door opened was an image that defines 21st century corruption. Industrial metal shelves from floor to ceiling, filled with black Samsonite suitcases and hard plastic boxes. Opening them revealed staggering contents. Bundles of United States dollars, still wrapped with Federal Reserve, bands. Millions in $100 bills, blocks of 500 euro notes, the purple bills called Bin Laden in Europe because everyone knows they exist, but no one sees them. Stacked like bricks. And on the floor, bearing their massive weight, gold bars. Not bank-certified gold, but raw gold, irregularly melted, blood gold extracted from the Orinoco Mining Arc, tainted with mercury that poisons the Amazon and the blood of indigenous people massacred for extraction. Preliminary counts, still ongoing, estimate that in that single room there were more than $80 million in cash and precious metals, enough money to reopen hospitals, buy dialysis supplies that have been missing for years, or feed entire cities. But it sat stagnant, gathering dust in a dark basement, waiting to fund a golden exile in Turkey or Russia that never happened. The irony is devastating. The man who screamed that the dollar was the weapon of the empire and forced his people to use bolivares worth less than the paper they were printed on, obsessively hoarded the currency of his enemy. Next to the vault, they found his operations center. A NASA-style room filled with giant screens monitoring social media in real time, Caracas security cameras, and troop movements. From an Italian leather ergonomic chair, Maduro watched his country crumble in high definition. There is one detail in this room that chills the blood and summarizes his disconnect. Virtual windows. Since the bunker had no exterior views for security, Maduro had 8 kHz screens installed to simulate fake windows. He could choose the view with a remote. A sunrise over the plains, a Roques beach, or, curiously, views of European cities like Paris or Madrid. The man who filled his mouth with patriotism and anti-imperialism spent his hours underground, staring at false landscapes of the countries he claimed to hate. Dreaming of a life in civilization his own policies had destroyed in Venezuela, in the adjacent closets, hypocrisy became textile. Hundreds of Brioni and Stefano Ricci brand suits, each worth thousands of dollars, and his collection of watches. While on television, he appeared with simple or sporty watches. In private, he collected Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, and Rolex pieces, stored in automatic rotating boxes. Watches worth what a Venezuelan doctor would take 400 years to earn. Why would a man who cannot leave his home need such precise and luxurious watches? Perhaps to count the seconds left on his throne. This bunker in Fuerte Tiuna was not a home. It was a mausoleum inhabited by a living man. Here, Nicolás Maduro slowly consumed himself, devoured by his own demons, surrounded by useless gold and concrete walls. If the underground bunker was a monument to fear, the main dining hall of the residence in Fuerte Tiuna was the monument to absolute moral indecency. Rising from the darkness of the basement into this room, illuminated by baccarat, crystal chandeliers costing more than the annual budget of a rural hospital. What hits first is not just the visual luxury, but the ghostly smell of hypocrisy so dense it could be cut with a silver knife. Here, on polished mahogany tables now collecting dust from abandonment, Nicolás Maduro and his inner circle celebrated the socialist revolution with full bellies and livers saturated with expensive alcohol. While just a few meters away, beyond the perimeter walls, his people endured the most devastating humanitarian tragedy in modern history in the Western Hemisphere. History will judge Maduro's mandate by many numbers. Hyperinflation of 100,000%, the biblical exodus of 8 million refugees, or extrajudicial executions. But the image that will remain burned into humanity's retina is that of physical hunger. Maduro's infamous diet was not an internet joke. It was a slow, biological genocide. Studies by the Andrés Bello Catholic University confirmed that Venezuelans lost an average of 11 kilograms during the worst years of the crisis. The world saw images resembling African war zones. University professors with clothes hanging from skeletal bodies, children fainting in schools from hypoglycemia, and elderly people searching trash for plantain peels to boil. And while this tragedy unfolded in real time, what was happening here inside? The answer is a slap in the face to every Venezuelan mother. Remember the incident in Istanbul? It was not an opposition rumor. It was a video proudly published by the famous chef Salt Bay. While mothers in Caracas served water with salt to trick their children's stomachs, Nicolás Maduro and Celia Flores sat in Turkey, smoking Cuban cigars and eating tomahawk steaks bathed in 24-karat gold, each worth more than $1,500 per plate. The image, the dictator cutting the meat with chef-like gestures, laughing with a mouth full of golden fat while his country ate its pets, defines his moral stature. It was not ignorance, it was contempt. The philosophy of the regime was reduced to 4 words: I eat, you watch. But the crime went far beyond a golden steak abroad. Inspecting the pantries of this abandoned mansion revealed physical evidence of obscene inequality. Industrial stainless steel refrigerators were filled with imported French cheeses, Iberian acorn-fed ham, 5 Yoda, brought from Spain in diplomatic luggage to avoid customs, boxes of Chateau Petrus, and of course, his personal vice, high-end whiskey. Maduro, who in public cursed the American empire and savage capitalism until he was hoarse, was a voracious consumer of their most exclusive products. In his private bar, hidden behind wood panels, there was no cheap national rum for the people. There were bottles of Johnny Walker Blue Label and Buchanan's 18, lined up like glass soldiers, while the people drank brown, contaminated water because the pipes were rotten and unmaintained. It is the classic schizophrenia of the communist tyrant. Hate the producer, but desperately love the product. Yet the true horror lies not in what he ate, but in what he forced others to eat to enrich himself. Take the clap boxes, local supply and production committees, sold by propaganda as the people's food salvation against economic war. It was in reality the cruelest scam of the 21st century. From this palace, a global corruption network was orchestrated, led by frontmen like Alex Saab, who bought leftover food in Mexico and Turkey at trash prices and resold it to the Venezuelan state at millionaire markups. Chemical laboratory analyses confirmed it years ago. The powdered milk Maduro gave to poor children in the barrios was not milk. It was a white powder full of sodium and carbohydrates, without calcium or protein. It was white poison. The rice came with weevils. The tuna was dyed soy. Maduro fattened his bank accounts in tax havens, poisoning the cognitive development of an entire generation of Venezuelan children. He used hunger as a political weapon. If you do not vote for me, you do not eat. If you protest, I take away your box. He turned Venezuelan stomachs into a political lever. While mothers cried because fake milk made their babies sick with chronic diarrhea, in the halls of Fuerte Tiuna, private parties went on until dawn. Former bodyguards and service staff testified to nights of excess where cigar smoke filled the air-conditioned rooms. At these parties, there was no talk of power outages or hospitals without antibiotics. They danced salsa, ate fresh lobster flown in private planes from the Los Roques archipelago, and distributed briefcases of cash as if they were birthday party favors. It was the Great Gatsby in a tropical, corrupt version, a bubble floating over an ocean of misery. In Celia Flores' dressing rooms, the first lady, the first combatant. We find the other side of this coin. European, designer handbags, Louis Vuitton, Chanel, Hermes, each worth more than what a Venezuelan university professor could earn in 500 years at minimum official salary. Red-soled Louboutin shoes that never touched the mud of a popular neighborhood. It is vanity funded by the suffering of others. Every thread of those designer dresses was paid for with a barrel of oil that should have been medicine, or with a gram of gold that cost the life of a miner. Looking at this long, empty, silent table, one cannot help but feel deep nausea. Here sat the architects of disaster. Here, between bites of caviar, they decided to raise gasoline prices or imprison a student. The banality of evil served on fine porcelain. But the inevitable question arises, where did all this infinite money come from? Because PDVSA, the oil industry, the crown jewel once envied by the world, was in ruins, producing less oil than in the 1940s. If the country was bankrupt, defaulted, and financially blocked, how were they paying for golden steaks, Patek Philippe watches, and villas in the Dominican Republic? The answer was not oil. Oil had run out long ago. To maintain this obscene standard of living, the bus driver had to become something much darker. He had to transform the Venezuelan state into a transnational criminal organization. We are about to leave the dining hall and enter the map room to see how Venezuela stopped being a country and became the global hub of narcotics trafficking. We will talk about the Cartel of the Suns. If we walk through the hallways of this abandoned palace, among oil portraits of Simón Bolívar and tricolor flags, we confront the financial enigma of the century. If PDVSA produced junk and debts, if the gold reserves of the central bank had been looted years before, which financed the army's loyalty, where did the cash filling the bunker vaults come from? The answer is the darkest and most dangerous transformation in Latin America's geopolitical history. Nicolás Maduro did not simply govern a failed country. He managed the safest, most protected drug trafficking route on the planet. Venezuela ceased to be a petroleum state and became the first fully functional, militarized narco state of the 21st century. Welcome to the territory of the Cartel of the Suns. The name is not a poetic metaphor. It is literal and chilling. In the Venezuelan army, generals do not wear 5-pointed stars on their epaulettes. They wear golden suns. And it was these suns, these insignias that should represent honor, defense of sovereignty, and the liberator's legacy, that were forever stained white. Under Maduro's permissive rule, the Bolivarian National Armed Forces, the FANB, stopped being a conventional army and became a criminal logistics enterprise of industrial scale. Unlike Pablo Escobar or El Chapo, who had to hide in the jungle, bribe local police, and build tunnels to move their merchandise, the Venezuelan capos did not need to hide. They had the absolute power of the state. Imagine the competitive advantage in the global crime market. You do not need to build dangerous homemade submarines when you have the Air Force's transport fleet at your disposal. You do not need to bribe customs officers when you are the customs. You do not need to fight the police when the police are your private escort. DEA reports, European intelligence, and formal United States Department of Justice charges that led to today's capture operation. and the $15 million reward describe a perfect machine. Cocaine produced in the industrial laboratories of the Colombian guerrillas, FARC and ELN, at the border. Crossed into Venezuela not through secret trails, but via highways guarded by the National Guard. The Colombian guerrillas, considered terrorists worldwide, were welcomed in Maduro's Venezuela as VIP business partners, housed in state estates and protected by the government in exchange for sharing the profits from the white powder. Maiquetía International Airport, and specifically Presidential Ramp Number 4, reserved exclusively for the president and his guests, became the world's most impugned distribution hub. From there, private planes and official PDVSA jets took off loaded with tons of high-purity cocaine bound for Honduras, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, and West Africa. Later reaching markets in Europe and the United States, it was institutionalized trafficking. Pilots testified that in those presidential hangars, the air did not smell of jet fuel, but of acetone used to process the drugs. According to the federal indictment that today has him flying handcuffed to New York, Maduro was not a passive observer or a leader deceived by his subordinates. He was the head of the serpent. He is accused of using narco-trafficking as an asymmetric weapon against the United States, with the declared intention of flooding its streets with drugs to destabilize American society while lining his pockets. It was the perfect revenge of an ideological resenter. Destroy the empire from within, using its own vices, and use that dirty money to stay in power in Caracas. But the business did not stop at drugs. The Cartel of the Suns turned Venezuela into a giant money laundering machine. Even darker actors entered the scene. Hezbollah, the Lebanese terrorist organization, found in Maduro's Venezuela a safe sanctuary and a base of operations for the Americas through key ministers such as Tarek el-Aissami, who managed oil and finances before falling from grace in an internal purge in Stalinist style. Sophisticated networks were created to launder money from Islamic terrorism and narco-trafficking through Venezuelan banks and shell companies in Panama and Turkey. Venezuela became the bizarre meeting point where tropical Marxists, Colombian drug traffickers, and Islamic fundamentalists toasted with the same 18-year-old Scotch whiskey. This criminal structure explains the mystery of why Maduro never fell before. Despite massive protests, sanctions, and economic collapse, it was not about ideology or loyalty to the revolution. The generals of the High Command did not care about 21st century socialism or Chavez's speeches. They cared that the business kept flowing. Maduro bought their loyalty by allowing them to become millionaires. A general who earns millions of dollars per month from narco-trafficking will not stage a coup to restore democracy and end up in prison. He will kill, repress, and torture to protect his root and his freedom. Today, with the fall of the head of the organization, that structure is exposed like an open wound. The digital and physical files that Delta Force operators are removing right now from encrypted computers in Fuerte Tiuna contain the names, secret bank accounts, and flight routes. It is the Nuremberg trial of narco-trafficking about to unfold. At the center of this web of corruption was not only Nicolás. There was a woman in the shadows with a cold smile and boundless ambition that even surpassed the president's. A woman who placed her own blood in key positions to control the flow of money. If Maduro was the public face of the regime, she was the administrative brain of the clan. To understand why this family fell, we have to talk about blood. We have to talk about the nephews who tried to play Tony Montana and ended up singing before U.S. Justice years earlier. The true owner of the palace was Celia Flores, the self-proclaimed first combatant. To understand the full magnitude of the Venezuelan tragedy, it is a beginner's mistake to focus solely on Nicolás Maduro's corpulent, mustached figure. He was the face, The megaphone, the puppet dancing salsa on television while the country burned. But behind the curtain, operating the daily chaos machinery with reptilian coldness, was someone far more calculating and familiar. In the history of great tyrannies, from the Ceausescus in Romania to the Marcos in the Philippines, there is always a universal constant. The dictator never robs alone. He does it with family. And in Venezuela, that family had an undisputed matriarch. A woman who went from being a combative lawyer to the owner of the keys to the kingdom. Celia Flores, the first combatant. Walking through the private halls of the residence in Fuerte Tiuna, where historical paintings had been replaced by full-length mirrors, we find Celia's fingerprint in every corner. Her power was not ideological, it was biological. Under her silent supervision, Venezuela ceased being a republic and became a family enterprise, a medieval fiefdom where the surname Flores was the only requirement on the resume to access the central bank vaults. Children, stepchildren, cousins, brothers, and nephews were strategically placed like chess pieces in the national treasury, the Supreme Court magistracies, and PDVSA management. They did not seek efficiency. They sought total control of the safe. The greed of this clan knew no limits, and it was precisely this boundless hunger that caused the first visible crack in the regime's armor in the eyes of international justice. History will always remember the scandal of the narco-nephews. Efrain and Frankie, raised by the presidential couple as if they were their own children, were not content with living off the national budget. They wanted more. They wanted to play in the big leagues of global crime using Venezuelan diplomatic passports and presidential hangars. They attempted to traffic 800 kilograms of high-purity cocaine to the United States when they were arrested by the DEA in Haiti during that undercover operation in 2015. Their arrogance was their sentence. In secret recordings played during the New York trial, they were heard boasting with astonishing calm. "The plane belongs to my mom," referring to the First Lady. "We are the ones in charge here." That sentence was not just a criminal confession, it was a radiograph of the moral rot of a family that had lost touch with reality. Today, while Celia Flores travels handcuffed on that military plane next to her husband, with her gaze lost and her hands trembling, she knows her destiny is not a golden exile on a Turkish beach. Her destiny is a family reunion in a federal cell. The reunion with the nephews she empowered and who ended up being the first dominoes to fall. But drug trafficking and the looting of public coffers were only part of the financial equation. When the oil industry collapsed from incompetence and theft, when the drills stopped pumping and the refineries became rusted scrap, the Maduro Flores clan found themselves cornered. They needed immediate liquidity. They needed fresh dollars to pay the generals, armed collectives, and to maintain their sultan-like lifestyle. Looking at the map of Venezuela, their eyes rested on the south, on the sacred jungle, the lung of the world. They decided to sell the land itself. Welcome to the hell of the Orinoco Mining Arc. What the regime sold to the world as a strategic development project was in reality the greatest planned ecocide in modern Latin American history. Nicolás Maduro drew a line on the map and delivered several thousand square kilometers of virgin territory, an area larger than Portugal, to the voracity of international mafias, Colombian guerrillas, the ELN, and criminal syndicates known as the Union. What is happening today under the canopy of millenary trees in the Gran Sabana is a horror movie surpassing any fiction. There, the Venezuelan constitution does not exist. The only law is that of automatic rifles and chainsaws. In the frantic pursuit of gold, diamonds, and coltan, Ecosystems that took millions of years to form have been devastated. Rivers, vital arteries of the country, have been systematically poisoned with mercury to separate gold from the soil. The crystal clear water has turned into toxic gray sludge that kills fish, animals, and indigenous communities who drink from it. Venezuelan blood gold has an incalculable human cost. Indigenous peoples, the Pemon, Yanomami, and Yekuana, ancestral guardians of the jungle, were subjected to silent genocide. Those who opposed mining were massacred in nighttime ambushes, their bodies thrown into mass graves or rivers to be devoured by wildlife. Survivors were enslaved, forced to work in open-pit mines controlled by criminal bosses, or forced to watch as their women and daughters became victims of trafficking networks flourishing around the mining camps. All this suffering, all this irreversible destruction, had a single purpose: to fill the suitcases found in the Fuerte Tiuna bunker. The gold extracted was not going to the central bank reserves to stabilize the currency. It was leaving on secret flights, Russian and Turkish planes, landing with lights off on clandestine or military runways, carried tons of uncertified bullion and took off toward Istanbul, Tehran, or Dubai. There, the blood-stained gold was melted, refined, and converted into euros and dollars in cash that returned to Caracas to finance repression. In Maduro's mansion, we found proof of this macabre connection. Among the shredded documents were records of transactions with shell companies in Turkey and the United Arab Emirates. Nicolás Maduro Guerra, the dictator's son, known as Nicolásito, played a key role in this scheme, acting as the czar of the mines, the crown prince overseeing the loot while living an international playboy life, throwing parties in Paris and Madrid while miners died of malaria and diphtheria in the south of his country. It is a cruel and devastating irony. The regime that boasted about Pachamama, environmentalism, and saving the planet at international summits was responsible for cutting down, burning, and poisoning one of the most important biodiversity reserves on Earth, all to stay in power a few more years. Every gold bar that Celia Flores stored in her safe, every ring on her fingers, weighed more than the metal. It weighed the souls of murdered indigenous people and the future of a jungle that may never recover. It was the final scam of a parasitic regime that, realizing it could no longer steal the future from the people, decided to steal the nation's geography itself. But money, drugs, and gold were only the financial fuel. The true engine, the dark, visceral piston that kept this regime standing for 14 agonizing years, was terror. While Nicolás Maduro enjoyed his gold-covered steaks and slept in his climate-controlled bunker, thousands of Venezuelans screamed in the darkness just a few kilometers away, in a place that became the global symbol of modern torture, a monument to bureaucratic sadism. El Helicoide. The structure itself is a perfect metaphor for Venezuelan failure. Designed in the 1950s as a futuristic shopping center, a concrete spiral meant to represent progress and modernity in a wealthy oil nation, a ramp to heaven where cars could reach the stores. But the project was never finished, and under Chavismo, the dream rotted. The mall, where people were supposed to shop and be happy, became the headquarters of SEBIN, the Bolivarian National Intelligence Service, the place where people went to disappear, be broken, and be forgotten. Under the direct orders of the chain of command ending on Maduro's desk, El Helicoide filled to the brim with students, human rights activists, Twitter users, journalists, and military personnel who dared to question. The stories from those windowless cells, known as preventive detention, would freeze the blood of any civilized human. We are not talking about harsh interrogations. We are talking about the scientific application of pain. survivors narrate medieval horrors with modern technology, electric shocks to sensitive parts of the body, suffocation with plastic bags impregnated with insecticide, the infamous bag technique, hanging prisoners by their wrists for days until shoulders dislocated, and white torture in the tomb, 5 floors underground in Plaza Venezuela, where sensory isolation and white lights 24 hours a day drove detainees to madness and suicide. Maduro knew all this. It was not ignorance. He signed the decrees, awarded the torturers, read the intelligence reports. Other people's pain was his most valuable administrative tool. The phrase, "If you oppose, you go to helicoid," was the silencer that fell over an entire nation. In poor neighborhoods, his death squads, the Phase Special Action Forces, with skull masks and black uniforms, executed thousands of poor youths under the euphemism of resisting authority, imposing a graveyard peace in popular areas that once supported the revolution. But history has a macabre sense of humor and relentless poetic justice. On January 3, 2026, we are witnessing a total reversal of roles. The cycle of the executioner has ended. The C-17 Globemaster military plane carrying Nicolás Maduro has just touched down on U.S. soil. The rear doors open. The air is cold, dry, very different from the Caribbean humidity. There is no red carpet, no honor guard, no national anthem. Federal agents in tactical vests, trained dogs, and steel chains await. The man who built El Helicoide to imprison his enemies is about to meet his own version of hell, this time legal, sterile, and eternal. His final destination has a name that resonates with terror among the world's most dangerous criminals. ADX Florence, in the high desert of Colorado, the Alcatraz of the Rockies, the only supermax prison in the United States, designed for those who cannot be controlled by any other system, for those the world needs erased from the map. There, Nicolás Maduro's life will change radically. No luxuries, no communication with the outside world. He will spend 23 hours a day locked in a 2-by-3-meter poured concrete cell. The bed is a concrete block with a thin mattress. The desk is a concrete block. The stool is a concrete block. Everything is gray, hard, and immovable. The only window is a 10-centimeter wide slot pointing directly at the sky, designed so the prisoner cannot see the horizon, the mountains, or a single tree, ensuring he never knows which part of the complex he is in. Total disorientation. He will have no contact with other prisoners. There will be no common yards to conspire. He will not hear Celia's voice, who will be in a federal women's prison in another state. Nor will he know anything about his children. No incendiary speeches on Twitter. It will be only him and the absolute, deafening, crushing silence of his own conscience. There in that hallway of living death, he will share a postal code, though he will never see them, with monsters like El Chapo Guzman, Al-Qaeda terrorists, and others who believed they controlled destiny and ended up as ghosts buried alive under tons of security. It is the end of arrogance. It is civil death. There, the worker president will have ample time, perhaps 30 or 40 years, to think of every student he tortured, every child who died for lack of medicine, every family he crushed. The fall of Nicolás Maduro leaves us with an eternal lesson, written with fire across the skies of Latin America. Democracy can be kidnapped, an army can be bought with drug dollars, and propaganda can deceive the world for a time. But tyranny is unsustainable by nature. History has infinite patience, but when it strikes with the force of a hammer. In the end, tyrants, no matter how high they build their walls or how deep they hide in bunkers, always end up the same, fleeing in pajamas, betrayed by their own, condemned to become a footnote in textbooks, a grotesque example of what should never be. As the reinforced steel door of the Colorado cell closes with a sharp thud, sealing the fate of a single man for the rest of his days, thousands of kilometers away, under the relentless tropical sun, another historic phenomenon begins. It is the exact moment when the collective spell breaks. History has taught us time and again, from the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 to the toppling of Saddam Hussein's statue in Firdos Square in 2003, that totalitarian regimes do not die slowly of old age. They collapse suddenly from massive cardiac arrest. And when they do, their sacred symbols are the first to bear the accumulated wrath of the victims. In the coming hours and days, screens around the world will be filled with images defining 21st century Latin America. Bronze statues of the revolution, those massive, poorly sculpted figures that watched over every town square like pagan deities, will be pulled down by ropes tied to old, rusted trucks. Hollow metal will strike the asphalt, dragged through dust and the jubilant screams of a crowd that has lost its fear. We will see Chavez's eyes, those obsessively painted eyes on every wall, every public building, every barracks, erased with white paint or hammered away. It is the visual purge of a nightmare. The cult of personality that yesterday seemed eternal, indestructible, and divine, today is just ideological trash carried by the winds of history. But the deepest, most moving change will not happen in bronze squares or on paper decrees. It will happen on the concrete and tiled floors of Maiquetía International Airport. That place, famous not for its architecture, but as the scene of the continent's most painful farewells, has floors decorated with the kinetic artwork of Cruz Diaz, watered with the tears of 8 million exiles who walked over it looking back, leaving behind their mothers, their children, their entire lives. Today, the energy of that sacred place is about to reverse. The largest diaspora in the Western Hemisphere, the children of flight, those who walked through the frozen Andes, those who crossed the deadly Darien jungle, those who washed dishes in Madrid, drove taxis in Lima, and delivered food by bike in Buenos Aires. Look at their smartphones with a mix of disbelief, tears, and fragile hope they dare not speak. For the first time in 14 dark years, the compass of millions of lives has stopped pointing only toward escape and has begun to tremble, timidly pointing toward return. However, let us not be fooled by the romance of the moment. The street celebrations will end, adrenaline will fade, and the harshest hangover in our history will come. Maduro is gone, yes, but he leaves behind a country that is an empty shell, a national skeleton. He leaves a generation of children with growth problems and cognitive deficits due to chronic malnutrition. He leaves an oil industry that is a graveyard of rusted scrap and broken pipelines. He leaves hospitals that are morgues without light. Most seriously, he leaves a society that will have to relearn trust after years of being trained by the system to denounce neighbors, to hate them, to see them as enemies. The tyrant is in prison, neutralized in a cement box. But the anthropological damage he caused will take decades to heal. Venezuela is a war zone, without having had a conventional war with bombs and missiles. It is a moral Hiroshima that requires total soul reconstruction. Looting was not only of money, it was of time, life, and the future. At the end of this Dantean journey through the abandoned mansion of Fuerte Tiuna, as the sun sets over a Caracas that, for the first time in years, sleeps without a dictator on its pillow, we are left with a mandatory reflection. The man who occupied these rooms thought he was the reincarnation of Simón Bolívar. He thought his power, sustained by bayonets and narcotics, would be eternal. He thought he could bend reality at will, and that the world would tire of watching. But reality is relentless and has geological patience. His legacy will not be the great homeland he promised in endless speeches. His legacy is these empty rooms, full of useless luxuries. His legacy is the suitcases with rotten money in the basement. His legacy is the silence of cemeteries and the noise of empty stomachs. Nicolás Maduro will be remembered not as a president, but as a warning. His name will become an adjective, an insult, a synonym for ruin. And finally, he will suffer the harshest punishment for an egomaniac who dreamed of statues. He will become oblivion. The palace is empty. Doors swing in the wind. The ghosts of corruption flee through the sewers. Venezuela, wounded, looted, but alive, rises from the rubble to write its own story, this time without a messiah, without tyrants, and without fear. This has been the urgent, visceral chronicle of the collapse of a criminal empire. We entered the mind and house of the monster to show that evil, however powerful it seems, always has an expiration date.